Hey, here's round two of the rebuttal of Mr. Wolff, Richard Wolff's economic update, answering the critics. I just wanted to show you, there's so many, but there's quite a good one, ourworldindata.org. I didn't want to, I wanted to find the least bias. So from the last video, I just wanted to show you poverty. I was going to show, there's, if you show over the last 100 years, it's phenomenal. But actually, what a more interesting one is this one, as hopefully you can see, since 1990. So you've got, as you can see, Europe and Central Asia here. I mean, very low poverty compared, but so at the height of it in 1990, you've got 1.9 billion people in extreme poverty, 36% of the world's population. And then you've got 2020, which is here. Yeah. So what is that? It's just, what is that, about 650 million in 2018. So we're between, yeah, is it 500 million? Oh yeah, okay. Oh sorry, yeah, moron. You could have read that for yourselves, guys. Sorry about that. 479 million in 2030. I reckon that's they're projecting it's going to slow, but I don't think it will. So we're around 500 million, but if it was 650 million in 2018 and 730 in 2015, you know, we're going down by the hundreds of millions per year, and that's just since 1990. So that's not exactly, I mean, if you look at that from say 1980, it's unreal. Anyway, so let's continue where we left off, where we finished last time. He said he'd be right back.
Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. I wanted to make one short announcement that I didn't get time for in the first half. Many of you have been doing quietly something enormously helpful to us over the years, which is to recommend to your local public or community radio station the idea of carrying this program. Indeed, that's the way we went from the one program in New York City on station WBAI to the 100 stations that now broadcast this program across the United States. I wanted to thank you, but even more, I wanted to ask those of you listening, if you or someone you know would be interested in having this program on a local radio station. The best way to get that to happen is for you, a local person, a listener, to let them know in your area that you would like to see this program, you'd like to hear this program, and we would appreciate enormously whatever initiative you could take to get this program on more stations across than we do here in the United States, and they have fewer civil liberties and political freedoms. Well, I think there's something to that argument. These countries started at a very poor level of development, to say the least, back in the work, and the ways also know that there is a radio station, the ways in which it did indeed work, and the ways also, which we're going to go into now, in which it didn't. But before that, I want to get to another kind of this criticism that socialism never worked. People who have in mind Russia or China or Cuba make the comment that they have a lower standard of living than we do here in the United States, and they have fewer civil liberties and political freedoms. Well, I think there's something to that argument. These countries started at a very poor level of development, to say the least, back in the 20th century. They've had a long way to go. They've gone faster than anybody else did, but they're still at a lower standard of living. Fair enough. And many of those countries, Russia, China, Cuba, have some way to go in terms of civil liberties and political freedoms. So let's take a look at another group of countries that refer to themselves as socialist, or at least an awful lot of people do. And I'm talking here about Scandinavia, Western Europe, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and in many ways Germany, France, Italy, and so on.
Nope.
What am I meaning by that? Well, socialism has often meant that the government comes in and takes a role to even things out in society, to create minimum standards of living that are nice and high, to provide all kinds of services at little or no cost to the people, a national health insurance program, free public education, subsidized housing, transport, and so on. Often referred to as the socialist countries of Europe, let's take a look, because if that's what we call socialism, as millions of people do...
No. Let me stop you right there, mate. Okay, I think Sweden and Denmark have said openly they're angry with Bernie Sanders for calling them socialists, and they keep saying stop calling us socialists. None of us in Europe, including in the UK, and we have socialized medicine here and a massive social a huge social program of public services, massive, and we're all the same in these European countries. Some of them have gone a bit further with it, like the Scandinavian countries, where they've gone for more of this kind of egalitarianism and equality. So they very modern, gone for kind of more rights for men, stay-at-home dads, and lots of policies like that. Let's get a few things straight. They are hyper-capitalists. They have we have as well here in the UK, but generally speaking, they have incredibly the lowest rates of corporation tax anywhere. But the problem is we have very high value-added tax, VAT tax. So in the UK, it's 20% right now. It's higher in those other countries, more like 25. It varies depending on the government. A lot of governments promise to lower it. Now that is a tax, direct tax on the poor, because it's on products. So all companies can pass that tax on to the consumer, and it just massively affects the consumer. So the poor and the middle class, it hits the most. In the same way that the tax system hits the middle class the hardest, because they have the super rich. They're rich as well. They're rich, can afford the taxes, and then they get everything for free, and they're still richer. Whereas most people in these countries actually just struggle to pay the taxes. It's a serious grind, and often if you're young, or if you'd much rather be spending that money on a deposit for a house, which you can't get because mortgages are impossible to get. You'd much rather be spending that rather than spending so much of your paycheck out on taxes that go towards public services that you hardly use any of them, because the NHS is mostly used up by, let's be honest, by the elderly, as it would be. Don't begrudge that, but obviously older people, they need more healthcare. They tend to use the system more, and so there is there's a thing where people get screwed, and it's the same thing. You have the same inequality. Rich people can afford it and they're fine. The middle class get screwed. The working class get even more screwed. And like I said, things like VAT taxes. Oh, and then import taxes. So cars out there have like ridiculous taxes on them. So most people can't afford to buy a car out there because they have like additional 80, but some of them are as high as 200%, I think, on some cars. Don't quote me on that, but it's a known thing. You can check it out. That's not the case here because most of Europe, Germany, etc., they like to sell us cars, and of course we produce our own here as well. but it's those countries are very very unique, and they're small in population, and they don't allow much immigration at all. They don't allow basically people that don't look like them in there. Basically, those countries are just full of white people, and they don't allow anyone else in because they don't want them coming and feeding from the pot, the trough, because they can't. There isn't enough to go along. So that's the truth. I've lived in the UK and Europe and known people in all sorts of European countries, and I've known Europe basically pretty well for most of my life. And this myth that Americans get about the Scandinavian countries is absolute nonsense, and they should do more research. So let's see what he's.
And guess what? They have as high a standard of living as the United States, or higher. They have political freedoms, more or less like the United States, contesting political parties in a spectrum from left to right that's actually wider, with more political choice than we have here in the United States. In other words, if you want to use civil liberties, you want to use political freedoms, and you want to use standard of living, then there are parts of the socialist experience that have done real well according to those standards. They haven't grown quickly on the scale of Russia or China, but they have standards of living and civil liberties and political freedoms that they don't have to put second to anybody else. Once again, this is a way in which socialism has worked very well in these countries, which is why they fight so hard to keep their national health service, to keep their subsidized education. In Germany today, as I've mentioned before, higher education, college and university, is absolutely free. No fees, no tuition, and not just for German citizens, for anyone.
We fight so hard because it costs so much.
They don't pay either. That's
and the reason we've had Brexit, and the reason there's this whole movement happening across Europe, is precisely that, to do with immigration. Is we desperately don't want people coming and using up our services that we pay so much money for. And yes, we do love them dearly. We love the National Health Service. It is amazing. It's amazing when it works well and you can go in and be treated and leave without having to pay a bill. And when it works, it's wonderful. When you have situations like my mother nearly dying in the waiting room of pneumonia whilst waiting, and people actually dying in waiting. There's lots of horror stories. I don't want to do my own health service down, but there are reasons. It's not some magical thing, but of course we fight to keep it, because we've invested so much into it. We've paid so much into it over our lives, and of course we wouldn't want to lose it now, and that's why there's a growing sort of anti-immigrant sentiment. Nothing to do with racism or bigotry or anything the left would try and suggest. It's because we worry about these precious public services that are on the brink of crumbling, and they require so much money being fed into them, and that's why we're not there saying, oh, this is the most amazing thing that's happened. It's like it's teetering on the edge. It's on the brink. Please don't break it. Please don't break it. And we're worried our politicians are going to do that. So, but when we're not there saying this is the most incredible thing in the world, we're desperate to hang on to it. That's not the reason. So what's next, Wolfie?
And no politician in Germany dares to work against it. But does socialism, therefore, offer some utopia? Of course not. Does socialism have drawbacks? You betcha. I've mentioned some, but here's one that I think is very important. Socialism always meant going beyond capitalism, not making capitalism less burdensome, say by a minimum wage, say by subsidized housing. It was the idea to go beyond. And if that's the kind of notion of socialism you have, then you would find existing socialisms, whether of the Soviet and Chinese variety or of the Scandinavian variety, wanting. You'd say they weren't successful because they haven't gone beyond what? The employer-employee relationship. A system of production that has us all working in factories, offices, and stores where a tiny group of people, the owner, the board of directors in a corporation, make all the decisions and we have to live with them. The absence of democracy in the workplace is a critique of capitalism that socialism has not yet overcome and can be criticized for. But the general idea that socialism hasn't worked is a criticism without merit. Let me get then to the third of these classic criticisms that have been leveled at us. And this one is...
How can you say that? A criticism without merit. Without merit. Here we go. Come with me as we Google. How many people has socialism, sorry about the one-handed typing, killed? There we go. Oh God, actually, let's... Google is such a biased place these days. There we go. Let's find a neutral source. Right. Fascism. Again, fascism has been called a right-wing phenomenon when fascism was coming about, it was all the socialists. It was all. But anyway, that's for another. Well, yes, I always thought it was about 100 million when you add Mao. Let's just see. Let's just see how many Maoist China deaths. Wikipedia I refuse to do because there was 45 million. I've heard more than that, 50, 60 million. Yeah, so that's just Mao's great leap forward. Soviet Union deaths. Yeah, 26.6 million. That's according to Wikipedia. That's World War II. Just the famine. Oh God. Anyway, you get the idea. I mean, how somebody can say that the notion that socialism has not worked is I mean, it's gobsmack. It's absolutely gobsmacking, especially when you look at just what's going on in Venezuela now. You ask any Cuban living in Florida now. I mean, just anywhere. My God, anyone that remembers a socialist or communist regime, just talk to them. It's undisputed. That guy. I mean, how can you say that? It has just it's been murderous. It's been at work. I mean, at best, it's moved government power to a very few amount, and yes, it's created equality. It's made everybody equally savagely poor and hungry. There's almost always been famine and hunger when socialism. Like in Venezuela now, they're starving right now, and they're the richest. They're the richest mineral oils, minerals, natural gas. They're still one of the richest in terms of minerals in the world countries, and you've got Maduro who is actually dying of obesity, so fat, and then you've got people eating out of bins, like rotting maggoty things out of bins, and stories about zoo animals and all sorts. And that's Venezuela right now. And the irony is, in the shops, there's on the packaging it says brought to you by socialism or something like that. It's just like, wow. Sorry, I digress.
Socialism and so forth. It's about the idea of worker co-ops, the idea that an individual, this is the way the criticism works, who invents a new product or a new idea or a new concept would have to share it, heaven forbid, with the employees as this individual inventor, let's call him or her, works out their invention into a product that we can all use.
Because it's all about inventions and products that are made in factories.
Why should I share my great invention with my employees who come on later to work in my enterprise but didn't participate in inventing? Wow, I find this extraordinary. Let's begin with what's wrong with this criticism. First, one thing to invent, another thing is to exploit workers. You don't need to exploit workers in order to invent. And you don't need to give an inventor the incentive of exploitation to get him or her to invent. This is a kind of bizarre argument. If what you're saying is we need to give an incentive to people to invent new products, new ideas, new technologies, I'm with you. Let's give them an award. Let's give them lots of public recognition. Let's give them some financial inducement. I'm okay with all of that. That's a way of encouraging people. No problem. But that doesn't require, nor does it justify, exploiting them later. Suppose I told you of a society in which, to give an incentive to investors, they were told, look, if you will just invent something, to invest then in it and build it up, we're so grateful we're going to give you 3 slaves for the rest of your life. We'd all gasp in horror. We don't need to do that. One doesn't require, and it certainly doesn't justify the other. Yes, we want innovative people, but we're not going to pay for it by going back on our commitment to abolish slavery. Wow. Let's give the inventor a reward. But that doesn't require that in the company that really makes the invention come alive and become real for us all, we have to allow one person to exploit, make money off the labor of others.
Let's give the inventor of Uber a reward, shall we? Because all that person did is invent something, or just came up with the idea when they were in the shower, and they did nothing else. And then oh well, that's it. But what else do they need? What else do they deserve? Or let's give them a plaque. Let's give them an award. That's right. This man is not even in this century. What is he talking about? An inventor? He's talking about what value, what has value, what has added value. You could use the analogy of the valet who parks the cars at a resort that has prestige and attracts lots of rich people, and therefore it's a resort, a golf resort and everything. And the guys say he's parking cars for $15 an hour. He works 10 hours a day. Maybe he parks 100 cars in those 10 hours or whatever, and he makes $150. And then you think, okay, well, the hotel or the resort is charging $30 a car, so they're making $3,000 a night. Why isn't the valet getting the whole $3,000? Well, because the valet wouldn't exist or have a job at all if the resort wasn't there and it didn't attract the people bringing the cars to him for him to park. The investment, the risk, the everything that went into building up that brand so that there are people bringing their cars to park in a car park that somebody built and paid for as well. Everything that required investment, whether it was a venture capitalist or whether it was a bank that they borrowed the money from, that they then subsequently paid interest back on. It's a whole value. Now, that's the closest analogy we can get to your 1890s kind of inventor, factory workers type scenario. But how do you apply your logic to modern tertiary based businesses and industry? How do you apply that to a software development company, software developers that make bespoke software for companies? And you have a team of developers. You have people who are in various different areas, from sales to and you have people of different skill sets and different things, and there's a whole process that then adds value to that software. That's all factored in. The cost of those people's labor and their skill is all factored into the value of that product. How many times it's been beta tested and how much support it's going to need going forward, and implementation, etc., etc. It's not as simple as just looking at an inventor, workers. It doesn't work like that anymore, Mr. Wolff. Wish you were as cool as Mr. Wolff. Anyway, let's hear some more from Mr. Wolff.
You know, a decent inventor wouldn't ask it and wouldn't require it. A decent inventor knows they're helping society. They're making it possible for less labor to produce as much output as before. They're helping develop the community that nurtured them. They don't need to be in a position to be the employer who rips profit out of workers whose wages they keep down. Let me get at it another way. I hear often the argument, well, the businessman or woman is taking a risk. They're investing their money into this enterprise to start it, say, perhaps an inventor who came up with a new idea, and they're taking the risk, and so something is supposed to follow from that. They're going to be in charge. I always found this an offensive argument. Here's a reason. The workers who go to work for the person who starts a business, they're taking risks too. That worker didn't take another job to work in this one. That worker may have moved his or her family from one place to another, their kids out of one school to another. They're putting their lives into this company.
And the
community
inventor didn't.
We don't pay.
Jeez, this is an offensive argument to me. And a very, very personal one. If any of you have listened to my debate with Hagen's two-part debate with him, I talk about how one of my companies, I invested a huge amount into my employees, and gave a little insight as to how unbelievably stressful it was, knowing that you have creditors, you have wages to pay regardless of whether you have any income, you have massive outgoings, you have huge huge doubt, huge. I mean, God, it's not just risk. It's not when he says the risk. I mean, my God, I'd done all those things as well. I'd moved. I'd taken on new premises, I'd taken on not just one risk, but like 15, and then another 15 as actual people. And as they got to go home and sleep like babies at night time, knowing that they were going to get their paycheck, I was lying awake as I was remortgaging my house to pay their wages as the business was going under. And it was the first time I've experienced that. But to brush it off and like some academic who's never done anything like it in his life, you've never even worked, Mr. Wolff, never even actually done a job like you're claiming to fight for the people that you propose to fight for. You haven't even done anything like that. You're an intellectual who everything is in theory. You have absolutely no idea how stressful that is and how difficult that is. And you're goddamn right that person is entitled to do what they want with their business if it's successful, because they have put more than risk, they've put their heart, soul, their lives, in my case, my life savings and borrowed more, and everything, my house, I lost my house, everything, all my money from everything, millions of pounds, so that those people could have a job. And you're right, I invested in people that were going to be the best to ensure that there was success, and there were some mistakes, and it's also the riskiest thing on the planet to do. It's why not many people do it, and it's why most successful people have gone bust or bankrupt at least once, maybe sometimes several times. A lot of businesses say, if you want to get into catering or the restaurant business, for example, 97% of them end in failure, and then that goes down the list. There's a strong chance that if you start a business, you're going to fail and you're going to lose all your money, and that's all on you. So yes, it's not an insulting proposition at all. And the poor people that can then just go along and take their resumes, their great CVs, and just go and apply for another job. Oh, that's a really risky for them, isn't it? What about the person who's bankrupt and as a result of taking on that risk and has nothing, not a penny, can't even get a bank account? So no, you need to understand what that risk is about, and that's not even on. I don't even know what it's like doing it on the scale of some of these big timers. I mean, the most amount of people I've employed is 15 to 20. So I imagine these people employ hundreds and thousands of people. Jeez. Right. Let's get back to this fool. No offense.
Pay them for that risk, do we? We pay them for the work they do, but not for the risk they took. If you want to reward the employer for the risk he or she takes, well, you're going to have to reward the workers also for the risk they take. But this is something
it's called a salary, a negotiated one,
never wants
which
to
they
do.
agree to.
And you know, there is a difference. The one who takes the risk to start and own a company, he or she is the one making the decisions. The risk taken by the worker is much poorer. You know why? Because they're taking a risk, but the decisions that will determine whether that risk pays off are not in their hands, are not under their control, because democracy doesn't exist in the world.
And they don't want
the risk
that
by
risk.
The employer is a risk over which the employer
You
has
don't
some
want that
control
risk.
and decision making. The risk taken by the employee, they have none.
You go and start a worker co-op. You don't want that
Here's
risk
another way
either,
of looking at it.
Wolff.
Many of the structures of capitalism are an incentive not to invest, not to invent. Let me give you just a few examples. You know many of them. Years ago, we learned how to make a light bulb that lasts forever. But the companies involved in making light bulbs didn't want that. And so there's an incentive in capitalism to block, to prevent invention. That has to be measured in here somewhere, too. Years ago, we knew that public transportation, trolleys, buses, much cheaper way of moving people than the private automobile. But the companies that were involved in making private automobiles, GM, Ford, and so on, they didn't want that. And they took steps to prevent it. There's an example of capitalism, profit, being an incentive to block efficiency, to block breakthroughs in public transportation.
Yes, but it keeps people in work.
Let me give you another one. I recently returned from Europe on an airplane. The seats were unbelievable. They were so narrow I felt like a sardine. Why is an airplane seat rendered less and less comfortable over time? Because there's a profit incentive to the airline companies to make it so uncomfortable that we will all pay extra to have a place where we can stretch our legs, pay extra so we are not developing a new spine as a result of an 8-hour trip, etc. There are incentives that work very perversely in capitalism, and we ought to deal with them as well. Yet another example. What incentive is there for workers to figure out new ways of doing things if the result of developing a new machine is that you lose your job? You know what new machines mostly do? They automate. And automation means when you replace workers with machines. And you know what you do to the workers who are replaced by a machine? You throw them out of work. The prospect of unemployment is a disincentive to invest and to invent for the mass of the working people. If you really cared about incentives to invent, you'd create the rewards for everybody. You wouldn't allow unemployment because that blocks the incentive to invent. Everybody would have an incentive if there was no unemployment and we rewarded everybody. Capitalism doesn't do that. It creates an incentive for profitable investment, and that doesn't require allowing you to exploit people who take the risk of working with you later, nor should you want it. The notion that somehow nobody would ever invent anything unless they were allowed to exploit afterwards, whether it's a slave or a serf or a worker, never held water. Those other systems had their development of new technologies, just like capitalism, and a future of a democratic workplace will be at least as inventive as anything capitalism has so far achieved. Thanks for your attention. We've come to the end of today's...
Right. Unreal. So I'm speechless, but of course you you have to have competition, you have to have surplus, you have to have profit, and you have to have competency. You cannot have a democracy in a workplace, in a company. Democracy that benefits the workers. How are they going to, what are the most workers going to do if they get democracy within their workplace? This is the thing. It's the most absurd proposition. Like, it's like most people who run large businesses, and anyone who runs a business actually, like just the word the democracy in the workplace it is like a laughable. It's a joke of a concept. And the truth of the matter is nobody wants it. Nobody wants it. Very few people want the pressure of being just the manager, let alone the boss or the very few people actually want that, and that's why there's a reason for that. Lots of people want to be in their domain, doing what they're good at, and be respected for doing that. They want to do their hours, and then they want to organize their life, and if they've negotiated a contract and they're happy with what their salary is, and then they can renegotiate it and things like that. That's the good side of capitalism. Yes, there's an awful side to unskilled, low wage, industrialized labor, which excitingly, as he rightly says, is starting to be automated away. Those kind of jobs are going to be automated away. And as I'm going to do a series on the fourth industrial revolution because I'm fascinated by it. But what happened when all the other things were automated away? The last industrial revolution, loads of other sectors popped up to support it, including unions and all the banking and insurance products and restaurants and the whole services in catering and hospitality industries, and there was a big boom in that sector, and what's going to happen with the new economy, the automated economy, is there's going to be much more value on the what are considered kind of menial jobs now, so on the more personable jobs that can't be done by machines. So things like being a bartender, things like being a masseuse, things that are uniquely human, that require you to be sociable and chat and have that human touch. Things that traditionally haven't paid that well are actually, if you're good at it, if you're very good, if you're very good, very sociable, very good at dealing with people, very personable kind of character, that's going to be an extremely valuable commodity. What was once, standard minimum wage maybe will become something that you'll earn a lot of money doing. And likewise, if your job is automated away, the machine that automates your job away, there's going to be a necessity for a job that maintains that machine and maintains other machines, and it's just going to be a case of just upping your training and your qualifications, which everybody has to do in an emerging, changing market. And anyone with any aspiration also adds to their skill set all the time. But also what we're going to see going forward is a lot more creativity, a lot more creative jobs. I mean, look how many people are making successful businesses on the internet, making videos. I mean, I don't count myself as one of those, but plenty of creative people are doing so, and so it's good that more things like that, and so this doom and gloom is wrong. It's exciting. What's going to be interesting is predicting what kind of industries are going to pop up, things that we don't even think about. So what a pessimistic, angry old man that's stuck reading the Communist Manifesto and oh, if ever there was all these book burnings that happen, why didn't Marx and Engels get tossed into the flames of history? I don't know. Anyway, that's my rebuttal to part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope there's some comments and likes, etc. Please subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.